Thank you. Thank you to the HKECIC. Thank you all for your time today. For the past couple of years, we've seen quite enough of the thing on the left-hand side. We're still seeing it today. Hopefully, the next time we meet, we won't be seeing quite so much of that. The right-hand side piece, I think apart from using it to scan into places in Hong Kong, it's also very heavily associated with payments. The QR code has become truly ubiquitous. And by the way, this is not you can't get a licensee from me on this QR code, so please don't try. But the point is this, I think from a payments perspective, things have digitized so much over the past 2 years, and it's truly been a transformation. From an online sales perspective, between 2020 and 2021, $700 billion additional globally in terms of online sales, massive growth. We still see that by 2025, things will have grown by another 50%. I think there's a massive number which is representative of the whole global online e-commerce market growing. So the opportunities are there. And a lot of that has been driven by the consumer, in spite of the uncertainty that we just heard a lot about in terms of what's happening for increasing prices. I think price of potatoes in Germany has grown by 50%, et cetera, et cetera. 77% of the surveyed online shoppers, this is from earlier last year, said they're worried about increasing prices. I can only imagine that it would have been an even higher percentage if that question had been asked within the last few weeks. So from a business perspective, how can they diversify the business, grow that business against that context and using the opportunities which are there, but also at the same time mitigating the risk which may exist? So we're a very cross-border audience, a cross-border speakership here. But in the report that I referenced, so this is PayPal's Borderless Commerce report, 57% of all online shoppers that we surveyed. I think this was 14,000 people globally across 10 different markets, if I'm not mistaken. 57% of online shoppers said they do some shopping internationally. In between 2021 and 2022, 42% of online shoppers said, hey, I'm a lot more comfortable doing this now compared to before. I think, Irina, you mentioned the behavior has changed in terms of people being comfortable to buy online and shop constantly online, looking at like this. So if I look at the consumer populations of various places, we've already had very, very good coverage of the China market in particular, but we've got Singapore there, Brazil, Spain, et cetera. These are places where I think going back a few years, you wouldn't have expected that people do a lot of shopping or that the populations or the consumers had done a lot of shopping cross-border in particular. But 79% of Singaporean consumers, maybe not so surprising, but Spain, 76% have said that cross-border shopping is totally a norm for them. Even France, historically very supportive of their own products, 64% have said, hey, cross-border is absolutely a norm. So that's where the opportunities are, or indicative of the kind of opportunities. So how do you take advantage of that from a business standpoint in terms of growth? We take a look from the consumer standpoint and what they are feeding back to us and through their behaviors. And I've got a few more slides which cover these in a little bit more detail. Consumers demanding more flexibility in terms of how they shop. This is very key and important. I think a lot of us are now kind of at least doing some hybrid working time from home. In fact, globally, we hear around 23% of people are in some kind of hybrid or flexi work, or even just fully remote working mode. So that change in terms of how people live their lives is very much kind of reflected in how they want to shop. They're now shopping in different places. They're now shopping from home, not during the lunchtime. Even the hours when they do this is very different. They're doing this on their mobile phone, etc. So the flexibility in terms of how they do this and the tools that we have, I think we saw reference to the uses of KOLs, the uses of VR, AR, in terms of assisting those shopping behaviors. Very, very evident in terms of what the consumers are looking for and what makes for successful use cases in the market. Economic uncertainty we've heard about, can't quite fully mitigate it, especially if you're a consumer. In fact, you're reacting to it. So what can they do? Well, they can choose to buy stuff which is cheaper. Some of the cheaper stuff comes from cross-border. Some of the stuff is not cheaper, but more valuable from a price standpoint. So Irina mentioned, ESG, etc. And that leads me on to the next point in terms of shoppers looking at brands and to look at destinations for their shopping, which resonate with their own underlying needs. And some of those needs are very values driven, like I want to help the environment somehow. I promote fair trade. So those are the different aspects which could change a shopping experience from something which, okay, might be a nice to have, to something that, okay, that makes more sense to me now. And even though I'm concerned about the uncertainty from an economic standpoint and inflation is high, I still think it's worthwhile me going through to press the checkout button and check out, hopefully with PayPal. A little bit more about consumers. Lots more flexibility. I think we mentioned the virtual and digital experiences already. And these take many, many different forms. And when we talk about innovation, this is the area where, sometimes they take a surprising turn. We've mentioned the KOLs. We've mentioned other aspects of VR and AR. And some of this could be very, very innovative oriented in terms of being able to measure my own waste as I buy a new pair of jeans. That kind of experience is something which is very uniquely online to begin with, and is in many respects something which helps us to mitigate for the lack of the physical experience that we experienced, especially during 2020 and 2021. 46% of consumers also said that they have a preference for retailers that offer flexibility in terms of options to spread payments. I think we've heard a little bit about kind of like buy now, pay later. So that is something from a flexibility standpoint, which helps a lot in terms of consumers understanding, hey, okay, I've got another option whereby I can do this. In fact, if I flip the question around, 22% of consumers said that, hey, if I don't see a payment option that I'd like to use or I would prefer to use, I wouldn't go ahead with the purchase. So is that 22% lost business? Maybe, but it's also a 22% opportunity in terms of what we could pick up to inform our customer purchase journey. Pricing. Yes, inflation high, cost of living crisis, especially in some of the markets that I mentioned previously. So it's okay for you guys to deliver the goods slightly more slowly, as long as the price is better. So I would prefer slow to more expensive. That was a very, very interesting kind of like feedback, because previously it was like, look, I want something right away. But we heard a very, very clear voice that, yes, that's still nice, but I'm prepared to sacrifice that in exchange for a better deal. And something which is kind of like price stroke value related. Lots of feedback in terms of an interest in spending more on products that can be enjoyed as a group or as a family. This could be a board game. This could be, well, any type of game that I can play with my son. It could be camping equipment, which we saw massive, even in the China market in particular. I think that was a major takeoff throughout the last couple of years, that I could enjoy with my friends and family. We mentioned the brand purpose, and this is not just specific to 1 or 2 markets. This was global as a feedback in terms of the eco-consciousness in driving purchasing decisions. China was part of a big feedback in terms of, look, this is really important to us. Buying something which also benefits, or at least doesn't harm the environment, something which relates to brands which are giving more to society as a whole. Very, very important in terms of influencing a decision, because I mean, if I'm looking for a piece of clothing as an example, which is pretty classic, there's a lot of choice, even in the online world, and online versus offline world. The branding aspect and the alignment in terms of the values orientation is something which helps to tip a decision one way, away from being a pure kind of like snap decision or an impulse buy to something which is more loyalty and branding related. I'll take a quick stroll through some feedback from the US consumers, which we haven't heard yet today. 37% of surveyed shoppers purchased through social media marketplaces. It's pointing to those fries. I probably wasn't an online buy, but it could have been. It could have been a delivery through the service perspective, and it could have been inspired by something I saw on TikTok or similar social media with a KOL eating fries or something like that. But 60% of surveyed shoppers also mentioned that they got some frustrations from out-of-stock items. In the clothing world, it could have been, hey, they didn't have my size, or it could have been, hey, there was so much demand for whether it's early days with the face masks, etc. High frustration. So being able to manage that from an operational management standpoint for an e-commerce operator or for any operator, clearly still very important, especially for the US market. And the ability to return. So 60% of US shoppers, they would go to a retailer where there's a very high degree of clarity about how I can return the goods. Is it a free return? Does it already come with a printed address label that I can just slap on the same box and send without charge to me to get those goods returned? Those are very, very important matters, especially when we weren't able to get physically to the shops. But it remains, from a behavior standpoint, something which is totally a great alternative to actually visiting the shops. So from a US shopper perspective, meeting the consumers where they are in the social media. So we saw reference to marketing spend. We saw reference to the usage of KOLs. We saw usage of consumers spending their time on digital experiences which help them on the purchase journey. Steady supply in terms of having goods available when I want to buy them, because otherwise it's a lost sale. Second, and thirdly, easy to buy, easy to return. So that was the US, but it's also broadly reflective of what we see as kind of like winning strategies, which can be very helpful to an e-commerce or any operators in this market. A customized and innovative shopping experience, I think that speaks for itself in terms of the purchasing experience that I can offer, whether it's on a website or whether it's on a mobile app, being able to integrate that with some of the innovative experiences that I mentioned, but also some of that actually relates to some of the points later on, and I'll get onto those. The use of social media and diverse sales channels, clearly something which is relates to the investment spend that we saw from the TDC's presentation in terms of being an enabler of business. Diversified and flexible payment solutions. We heard about the points on having very familiar payment options for the consumers to choose from. And finally, the brand value and positioning aspect of it in terms of aligning from a value standpoint to the consumer. So if I flip that around totally, the key from a winning strategy standpoint is to take advantage of the behavior changes which have come out from the past couple of years during the pandemic, but we're in the context of ongoing growth in the online sales market, and using these points to actually execute on specific areas and specific angles so that we can make a successful growth whilst managing our risk. Thank you.